little glad to go home. I don't know. It's the worst area we've been in. Hurry it up, check it out, quickly.
Today on this episode of History Channel's 5-part documentary series, we bring you the last of the Vietnam War. From the fighting to the escape, what goes on to those being brought out of the country, and to those who are bringing them out? The answers are still out about. And for those answers, stick around. This is History Channel's Operation Frequent Wind, the final option. 5 years after the division of the country by Geneva Accords, the North under Ho Chi Minh with a communist background and South under Ngo Dinh Diem with a democratic background began its civil war. From 1959 to 1975, the North and the South kept its fierce battle as Ho Chi Minh launched guerrilla campaigns in the South Vietnam. As part of the countermeasure to stop the communist rule from spreading, the United States also intervened as they advised and trained the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. As the United States warship was attacked by the North Vietnamese troop, the U.S. began its direct involvement on March 2, 1965.
In 1974, American intelligence groups had believed that South Vietnam would be able to last until at least through 1976. But following a series of offensives started by the North Vietnamese Army in December of 1974, these beliefs began to come into question. This was particularly true after the fall of Hue and Da Nang on March 25th and 28th of 1975. And so after these events, the Americans decided that they needed to evacuate all non-essential personnel from southern Vietnam. So as a result of this, they evacuated as many people as they could and left around 1,250 American officers and intelligence agents in the city of Saigon.
However, with the Tet Offensive from North Vietnam, the United States pulled out as it no longer wished to sacrifice any more American lives. As South Vietnam was not able to pull out a victory after the subsequent absence of the United States, the U.S. began a process known as Operation Frequent Wind.
On the morning of April 29th, the North Vietnamese Army began to hit the Tan Son Nhut airport with rockets, and as a result, many of the runways were destroyed, and more were destroyed when a South Vietnamese pilot defected to the North Vietnamese and sabotaged more runways. As a result, at 10:48 on that same morning, Operation Frequent Wind went into place, but it was decided that helicopters would be used instead of fixed-wing aircraft. And so starting then, the Irving Berlin's White Christmas began to play on repeat on the radio as a signal for all American personnel to evacuate, and to also to friendly South Vietnamese citizens. Over the course of the day and carrying on into the next day, pilots flew American citizens and Vietnamese refugees back and forth between the airport and American and Vietnamese ships stationed off the coast of Vietnam. And over the course of this, they were able to evacuate more than 4,000 citizens from South Vietnam. And during the course of this evacuation, the North Vietnamese actually chose not to shoot at any of the helicopters because they believed that an attempt to block the evacuation would bring intervention from the U.S., and they wanted the U.S. to simply clear out of South Vietnam so they could take it over for themselves.
The escape from South Vietnam may have been difficult, but that was only one part. The journey to the United States was even more difficult and longer. Commonly known as the Boat People, these men and women had to journey many night and day before they reached safety, from where they could move on to the United States.
My name is Lena Tran, and my parents recently passed in a car accident. But before they passed, they wanted me to make sure people around the world knew their story and their journey to America. So they were boat people, and they had a pretty well-off life in Vietnam, but they knew that more opportunities, or they could find more opportunities in the United States. So they knew in their hearts that they were going to escape one day, but they didn't exactly know what date for sure. It wasn't until April 29th, 1975 that their journey officially began. So it started off on a boat to Thailand, and I remember them telling me that that boat was very, very small, and there were about 55 people on that boat. It went for 9 days and 8 nights. And I remember them telling me that after night 5, things began to go downhill. They said that at one point there wasn't enough food or water, so they had to drink each other's urine just for something to drink. For the next day, my parents don't really remember what happened, but they remember that they were in a very state of shock. They never told me exactly how they escaped the pirates, but they did, and they eventually sailed off on their own. And can you see it?
No.
Okay. They eventually sailed off on their own boat, and about 2 days later, they met another boat with about 8 men on it. They were very reluctant to try to come beside it, but they knew that they didn't have any more food, they didn't have any more water, and this was basically their only option. So luckily and fortunately, the men on this boat were very humane and very nice, and they brought the people on the boat back to Thailand. So my parents and the people on the boat stayed in Thailand for about 5 months, and after that they made it to New Orleans. And my parents stayed there for about a month, and they don't really remember anything significant happening there, but after about a month they moved to Houston, Texas, where they were up until they died.
The situation for the Hmong people were one of the worst. Even after their evacuation from South Vietnam, they found themselves in a worse situation.
In 1975, the North Vietnamese troops and the American troops met in Paris to negotiate the terms. After that happened, they created a treaty saying the American troops had to flee or leave the southeastern Asian islands and countries and leave them to the actual troops that are supposed to be stationed there. Now, when that happened, some of the Hmong people in Vietnam fled to Laos, hoping that they can evacuate from the Communist rule. When that happened, another leader, Pathet Lao, decided to take over Laos for himself, saying that he wanted to bring back the prosperity to Laos. When that happened, he decided to massacre all these Hmong people for their support in the secret war and their support to the American troops. After that, the Hmong people felt again oppressed, and they felt that their lives were in danger, and decided to flee from Laos.
The situation in the United States for these refugees were not as horrible as it might have been. The United States was quick to their feet and organized the Refugee Act of 1980, which loosened the entry regulations for these refugees. Also, the new immigrants were matched with one of 9 voluntary agencies whose job was to coordinate the refugees' eventual resettlement with local sponsors into communities throughout the United States. Churches and families provided for the new immigrants, and eventually the Vietnamese Americans helped to revitalize urban centers.
As a result of Operation Frequent Wind, there were large numbers of South Vietnamese individuals who no longer had a place to live. In response to this, the American Attorney General actually gave them refugee status, which allowed many to move to the US, while others simply lived in the Philippines. And a few years later, these individuals were actually allowed to become US citizens after having lived in the US for 5 years after the evacuation of Saigon.